kin selection doesn't work for humans because we are essentially an evolved great ape, and great apes do not have families. They don't even form very permanent groups.
Yeah.
There's no fatherhood is never known because great apes are very promiscuous, and not only that, the normal female offspring bonding occurs when they're young, but in all great apes except one,
So the chimps, yeah.
the chimps, the greatest, the males and females leave their mother forever. They never see them again, leave their community and go to another community and never see their parents again. So there's no generational kinship relationships except among chimpanzees. The females in chimpanzees do leave, just like orangutans and gorillas. They leave forever, never see their mothers again.
Right.
The males stay in their mother's community, but they don't live with their mothers. They don't form communities with their mothers. They visit them every so often, just like a human male will visit his mother. And they have a cordial relationship. So there's no kin selection. It's just, and not only that, there are no permanent groups among great apes. They don't form permanent groups. They're the natural unit of a great ape is community. That's
right.
And that's why humans so easily relate to community. They easily identify with community. But groups are hard to maintain. And think how hard we have to work at maintaining any group. It's a lot of interaction, a lot of work and effort is put into sustaining friendships and groups because these are not natural for evolved great apes. Yeah. We've created it. That's the story of human nature in many ways. We created a new nature for ourselves. But the point is that a lot of the traditional ways of talking about, especially in sociobiology and evolutionary psychology, of talking about human nature are just wrong. They're assuming that there's kin selection, there's not. They're assuming that there's groups, there's not. They had to be created. They had to be created. The nuclear family is not a natural unit for a great ape. They don't have them. Lots of other mammals have nuclear families, but not great apes. So and then the other problem with most efforts at human nature is they look at humans today and then try to reverse engineer and say, which of these things, behaviors that we engage in are biologically based and which are not biologically based, or which are based with some biology and some sociology. And that's not the way to do it because you're looking at a human that's living in a very complex society, heavily socialized and integrated into groups and culture. How are you going to find the biology? It's very hard to find the biology. So the alternative approach, and I'm the only one along with my wife who's done this, is do what's called clinistic analysis. And you go back to chimpanzees. And what clinistic analysis essentially does is say, if you have a series of species that are closely related genetically, and you look at the various behavioral traits and also physical traits that they have, and that those traits they have in common are very likely, in fact, almost for sure, are what the distant ancestor of those related species had. So if we look at chimpanzees today, and gorillas and orangutans, the thing you notice is the weak tie structure of great ape communities. Monkeys are just the opposite. They have very intense group communities.
Right.
Great apes don't have groups. They have communities that are spread out, say 20 square miles oftentimes. And individuals walk around there and they hook up and have brief interactions. They hang out together for a day. They might even at night have a little festival, get all excited and do what people do at festivals, and then it breaks apart and they move on. And they know each other. Everybody know who's in the community about it. It can be as many as 150 people in great apes in the community. And they know who's there and who doesn't belong there. They'll protect their boundaries from incursions. They'll always let females come in because all the females in the community, among all great apes, including chimps, have left. So all the sexual partners have left. So you've got to replace those with females from the other communities coming into your place. So females are welcome, males are not, they'll kill them. Especially chimpanzees will kill a male and try to enter its community from another community. Yeah. So it's not the kind of, so there's no nuclear family, there's no groups. It's a weak tie structure. And so we are related very closely to great apes. We share over 99% of our genes with a chimpanzee, 98 plus with a chimpanzee, a gorilla, and about 97 to 98 with an orangutan. That is, so if we do cladistic analysis, at our biological core, we're a weak tie animal. And groups are not something we do naturally. It's not a bioprogrammer in us. Most people assume there's a bioprogrammer for it. No, it's had to be constructed, and it has to constantly be reconstructed. Groups are very hard to maintain. Think about friendships, how hard they are to maintain. How about groups over time? They're very hard to sustain because we have to work at them so much, because they're not, and that's because they're not natural to our biology. So when you go back and look way back when, there's lots of traits that you can list, and all the books I've written on this, I list them, the sort of traits that are common to all great apes, and hence they're common to humans. But what we can't see them normally when we look at humans today, because we have language and culture and very complex social structures. And those are we're seeing everything through a cloud of structure and culture that just hides what our biology is. And so when you do the cladistic analysis, it becomes pretty clear what's basic to chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas. And that's what our hominins are bipedal great apes that are on the line to humans. Somewhere around 5 or 6 million years ago, hominins appeared. Just after the last, let's go back to history. About 13 million years ago, orangutans split off as a line, and they have a whole bunch of descendants of modern day orangutans. About 8 million years ago, gorillas split off, and they got 2 subspecies, mountain and lowland gorillas, and there were a lot of changes probably, but not as many as there were in humans. And then about 5 million years ago, the ancestors of contemporary chimpanzees broke off from the line that would lead to humans. And so that went off. So then you go down, and that's when you have hominins. These are bipedal great apes walking around. Lucy, the Australopithecus Lucy, as the most famous one.
Right.
And they're all bipedal. That's what the name hominin means.
Yes.
And so for 5 million years, selection was working on basically the brain and the body of an evolving chimpanzee. And so what were the selection pressures? Well, the selection pressures were these. The forests in Africa were beginning to recede off and on with colder weather. And so great apes are adapted. They evolved in the arboreal habitat of Africa. High in the trees, where there's not much room or space, and apes are big compared to monkeys. They're 150 pounds, a male chimpanzee. And all the traits that a great ape reveals are the result of that evolution very high in the trees. You have a forest canopy, you're way up there where the branches are thin, there's not much room, there's not much food. That's where the great apes evolved. The monkeys won out in the competition. They took over the core of the tree where there's structural support for them, and there's food. They got to fruit easier than great apes because they could eat unripe fruit, so they took it all, and the great apes never got it. Humans today can't eat unripe fruit. So the point is, we sort of lost out, our ancestors lost out of the competition with monkeys, who are very group oriented. They have very intense groups opposed to female matrilines, lateral and collateral kin, all related to each other. And the males are the one who transfer in and form a hierarchy. So you got 2 big structures: male hierarchy structure, female matrilines. They also sometimes have a hierarchical structure. Very different structure than great apes, because they've got room to have that structure. They can put lots of conspecifics right there in the middle of the trees. There's lots of food. They can be much bigger groups. Great apes are up there on the high of the trees. There's not much room. There's not so much structural support. So they created this very unusual pattern for a mammal of female-male transfer away from their mothers at puberty, because they have to find another place in the arboreal habitat. There's not enough room to accumulate generations in one space. It'll just be death by gravity. They'll fall out of the trees. They're way up there. Now, the great apes, some of the great apes that we are descendants from, the chimpanzees and gorillas, are less arboreal because they're much bigger. they're really big. I mean, gorillas are a huge animal, but a chimpanzee is a very large animal. It's a large mammal. It's not a small mammal. It's small compared to an elephant, but it's not a small mammal. It's big. And it's hard to be way up there. Chimps can get up there, but they spend about half their time on the ground. They just go up at night to sleep. And gorillas go up to sleep to get away from predators. And the orangutans are the only ones that hardly ever come down from the trees. They live their lives in the trees. So they don't come to the ground hardly at all. They're in Asia. But the point is, it's this habitat led to creating bioprogrammers for male and female transfer away from mother. The relationships between adult males and females are totally promiscuous. Females, when they're receptive, they have what's called a lineup. The female is receptive, the males just line up and wait their turn. And so you never know who father is. Father never is in the life of an offspring. It's the mother, infant, young, up to puberty bond, which is universal, pretty much universal among mammals. That's the only real sort of strong relationship, intergenerational relationship, except for chimpanzee males who have a nice friendly relationship with their mothers, but they don't live with them, they just visit them. So that's our background, that's what we are. Now, as the forest began to recede, not all great apes who had once existed could live in the trees anymore. There wasn't enough room. They had to start, this is the case with the hominids. They probably initially were like chimpanzees. They were down on the ground most of the day, and then they go up the trees for protection at night. But as the forest got less and less and less, they were forced to move successively over several million years, move out to the more open country habitats, bushlands, even the savanna.
They were vulnerable there.
Yeah, well, what's the problem then is they don't have any group organizations. Monkeys have no trouble going out. They march across the savannah like a military troop with the head male at the front, all his lieutenants around. Males and female children are inside. They're dimorphic. Males are bigger than females. Chimps are dimorphic, but not as much as monkeys are. And so they just march across, and they can defend themselves against almost anything because they're pretty tough little animals. Even though they maybe a hamadryas baboon may only be 100 pounds, it's 100 pounds of teeth and claws, and it's a pretty tough animal. And they know how to organize as groups. They can do that. Chimps can't do that. And the only time chimp ever organizes is if they do a patrol around the community every so often, just to make sure no one's coming in except females, except females, because they want sex. So what happens? Natural selection has to do something to create an animal that can form more permanent groups. And that's not something that chimps ever do, or gorillas ever do, or certainly not orangutans ever do. They get some of the bonobo chimps, but they're not related to us so much because they came 3 million years after the split of the common chimp from the human line. So my argument's been for a long time is that and this is where you do something else. You do comparative neuroanatomy. I looked at the brains of great apes, and then you look at the brains of humans. And you say, what's the difference between this brain and this brain? Well, there's not a lot of difference. They're structurally pretty much the same, except almost every key structure is larger in humans, controlling for body size, and they're denser neurological connections among the parts of the brain.
Right.
But otherwise, they structurally look much the same. But one of the thing that I saw immediately, which no one seems to pay a lot of attention to, is the subcortical part of the brain. That's where emotions are generated. It's the part of your brain here. If you go inside, your neocortex going all around your head like that. But right about your eye level, you have your olfactory bulb here, which is subcortical. Then going a little further in, you have the amygdala, which is the center for fear and anger. And right behind that, you have the hippocampus. And then you've got an area called the cingulate gyrus, which goes around. It's sort of the layer between the subcortical part of the brain where emotions are generated and the big neocortex that we have. I can see my big bald head. I just got, there's something up there.
Okay.
But this part of your brain is way down here. And that's the ancient part of the brain. Before there were big neocortexes, there was only a subcortex. And that's what allowed animals to survive, because it generates the emotions that allow them to escape and run and defend themselves of anger if they have to, if they're trapped. So what you notice immediately, all those structures are twice as big in humans as they are in any great ape, controlling for body size. Basically, all neurological structures correlate roughly with body size. So a gorilla is going to have a big thing, but relative to its body size, our subcortical areas are much bigger. Now, why was natural selection selecting on the subcortical parts of the brain and making all those subparts bigger? The only answer could be is that somehow emotions, enhanced emotionality, was fitness enhancing. It allowed those hominins going out to the savannah to survive, and did so by using emotions rather than bioprogrammers to create groups. And that's one of the big problems for humans today. We use emotions to create groups. Well, emotions, 2/3 of your emotions are negative. Anger, fear, anxiety, guilt, shame. These are not pleasant emotions. And you got happiness and whatnot, but it is a real problem when you rely upon emotions to make things. This is why groups go wrong all the time. So you say a little thing and someone gets mad and you're apologizing all over the place and trying to get the group back together. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Vice columns in the American newspapers, that's basically they're talking about why isn't my family can't be happy? Why can't my friendship be happy? And the answer is you're an ape. You're an evolved ape, and you now have about a big supercharger on your emotion centers, and that evolved first. That had to evolve first. You can't have a big neocortex without a lot of emotions. And so that's what allowed, I think, males and females eventually to form more permanent relationships, the emotions attached to it. And there's an area of the brain, several areas of the brain that are pretty much devoted to the pleasure associated with sex. And that's way over twice as big in humans than it is in great apes. And you wonder, why would you have to have an enhanced thing for sex? Because great apes are sex, they're having sex all the time. They really don't mess around about sex. It's you feel like it, they do it. And there's no guilt, there's no shame, there's no mom and daddy looking at you.
No constraints, yeah.
So the point is, why would that have to be? Because, well, I think what it is it's not the pleasure associated with sex. I think it's some of the other emotions that are associated with sexual relationships, that softer emotions of love and attachment and feeling bonded with somebody and caring about somebody. A lot of those emotions are probably being generated there in those areas that were originally devoted primarily just to make sex enjoyable, so people would do it, or great apes would do it. So that probably is what happened. And so you got the males and females getting attached and bonded, and then they would take care of their offspring. And that ultimately was the origin of the nuclear family. But that probably took millions of years to evolve, because you had to get the emotions just right. But certainly by Homo erectus, which is the ancestor to all hominins, it was, say, starting 2.2 million years ago. They clearly had to be group oriented, because they were moving all over the world, and they were getting out. They were going in snow. They were going all over Eurasia. They got out of Africa and were adapting to a wide variety of habitats. And you can't do that unless you're organized. An individual Homo erectus they were pretty big. They're 6 feet tall, bigger actually than some of the modern apes in terms of height. And they just don't have as big a brains as humans. But at the very end, they do. They have brains that are up there around 1,000 cc's, and average human brains around 1,300 cc's, 50 cc's. So they're in the human range. The lower end of humans is around 1,000, 1,050 cc's. So that's what allowed the nuclear family to exist. Once you have the nuclear family, you can probably survive, because you join up nuclear families in a band of hunters and gatherers. and you've got 60 or 70 people who coordinate their hunting and gathering and distribute it all to their families, and they can coordinate hunts, they can coordinate gathering, and they protect themselves. And so that was the key. But so well, the entire foundation of human societies is based upon very high levels of emotionality. So you can enhance all the positive emotions, but that's not the way the brain works. The negative and positive emotions sometimes sit right in the same places. So you enlarge one structure, you enlarge both. So you have more anger, you have more fear. I mean, the amygdala in a human is twice as big as it is in a great ape. That's what centers of fear and anger. Now, interestingly, the most of that size difference is taken up with a new structure. One of the nuclei in the amygdala is the most ancient emotion center, fear and anger. If you're not afraid of pet predators, you die. And if you can't stop it and protect yourself with offensive anger, you die. And so that's the most, and it's right behind your nose. So most mammals are olfactory dominant. So the minute you smell danger, that kicks that amygdala up and generates both fear and anger. But the biggest nuclei that's not there in chimpanzees or any other great ape is the lateral nuclei. There's 6 or 7 nuclei in the amygdala. So the centers for anger and fear are slightly different places within the amygdala. Right. So anyway, that is devoted to, we know now, by a couple syndromes associated with it. Here are the 2 syndromes associated with damage to that lateral nuclei. One is autism. One of the when there's damage to that, oftentimes children and adults are autistic. Right. They can't read the emotions well of other people. Thus, they can't interact with them the way humans have to do. And that's so that means that center is doing something. It's creating our capacity to look at context, to understand the situation, and to feel out the real emotions. And the other syndrome is just the opposite of autism. It's called Williams syndrome, and it's where people over empathize. So a child with Williams syndrome sees a stranger who looks sad. That child will walk up and hug it and say, "I'm sorry." Yeah. It's really quite moving when you see it. I've seen a couple of tapes of it. It's really remarkable. So that area was added on. It just snuck it in there between the ancient center for fear and anger. That's probably a good idea because that probably tones down the anger and fear. Because one of the things you're using with that nuclei is to assess situations in terms of their emotional context. And so once you understand the emotions better, you can more easily and readily interact with people. That's something that humans are very alerted to, the emotions of other people, our emotions, what we're feeling, and what other people are signaling to us about emotions. And that's the structure, that's the basis of all human social organization. We've created these monster societies of hundreds of millions, in a couple of cases, billions of people. Yeah. And it's all built upon this very fragile thing. The enhancing the emotions, that's a pretty dangerous thing to do to a species. Right. Now, it helps to some degree. When you have more emotions, it's possible for the neocortex to grow, but that occurred very late in hominin evolution. I don't think, well, I know for a fact that the brain of a chimpanzee is around 400 cc's. Mm-hmm. And the brain of Lucy, or the first one of the first hominins, pretty small animal, is about 400 cc's. Then you get some later fossils around 3 million to say 2.5 million. And that includes early Homo erectus, but also includes Homo habilis and some of these other, Ergaster and some of these other animals that are right on the human, or near or right on the human line. The brain never gets bigger than about 500 cc's. It's only 100 cc growth of the neocortex in about a 4 million year period. All the growth began after about 2.2 million years ago, and I think it really accelerated at the very end, say maybe the last 700,000 years of evolution from Homo erectus to various homos. We had many humans. We have Dissonians, we have Neanderthals, we have Homo sapiens, we have Homo ludeli. There are lots of uh, human like animals that are human, that are genetically human because they ate a bread.
Right.
You know, I'm very proud that I have 2.6% of my genes are Neanderthal genes. I'm very proud of that because my wife finds it very sexy, I guess. I don't know. But the point is, so the brain could only grow after the emotions there, because thinking and being rational depends upon emotionality. This
Right.
whole philosophical distinction, there's one end is rationality, the other end is emotions. That makes no neurological sense. And if you really think about it for a moment, anytime you're trying to think out what you're going to do and make the right decision, what are you doing? You're probably assessing how it feels to you.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. That'd be bad. I like that. That looks pretty good. And everything you say and do is connected to emotions. You can't think and make decisions or even hold a memory in your head without attaching emotions to it. Your hippocampus in your brain, right behind the amygdala, is the area where emotions are attached to cognitions. If an emotion is not attached to a cognition, you can't remember it. And you won't remember it for long. And any long-term storage, any long-term motion, memory you have, after about 2 years, if you recall the memory several times in a row, during this time it's sitting in the hippocampus tagged with emotions, and you experience those emotions again, you're going to solidify that memory. And what it's then done, it's shipped up to the prefrontal cortex up here for long-term storage. It's sort of like your own personal cloud storage. It's getting out of your processor into your cloud storage area. And that's why when Alzheimer's hits people, it attacks the hippocampus right away. That's why you lose short-term memory in the hippocampus, because it's attacked, it's brutally destroyed. It takes a lot longer for this perforation of the cells in the brain to get to the prefrontal cortex. So you cannot recognize your wife today, or what you said yesterday, but you can still remember what you and your wife did 40 years ago. And eventually, when you don't remember who your wife is, then it's gotten up here to your long-term memory. That's the tragedy of that disease, because people can be quite physically healthy, their brains are just going to mush. But it gives us a sense for how the brain works. And then Antonio Damasio was pretty well known, probably worldwide, neurologist, and his wife Hannah have done all kinds of studies of this. There's natural experiments where you have lesions from epilepsy. They break some of the connections between the emotion centers of the brain and the prefrontal cortex, right here, where you do all your which sorts everything out, and it's where you actually think and make decisions. So when that's damaged, these people can't make decisions. They just can't make a decision. They never make an optimal decision. They always make suboptimal. But it's very hard for them even to make a decision, because they're not able to tag the various alternatives they're considering with emotions. And so that's how our brains work. So we're stuck with it. And we should not be surprised that we're violent. I mean, chimps can be quite violent, and we're quite violent, obviously. And we've got all our emotion centers, not just our positive ones, but our negative ones. We've created all kinds of new emotions by mixing them up in some unknown neurological way. But the point is, everything, the foundation of human societies is not religion. It's not the nuclear family. It is the nuclear family, but not a bioprogrammer for it. It's built upon emotions. Wow, that's a pretty dangerous thing to build a billion-person society on.
Right, I agree.
Okay, so when you look at human nature this way, go back to the beginning and strip culture away, strip our brain, our big brain away, and go back to what we looked like, say 7, 8, 9 million years ago, our ancestors looked like. And say, what are the behavioral capacities of those animals? And chimps are a great story for us, because their habitats haven't changed that much. I mean, the human habitat changed enormously, because we had to leave the forest, go to the savannah, and eventually all over the world. But their habitats have pretty much been the same in the forest in some way. They don't leave the forest. So they haven't changed as much. So they're pretty good proxy, best you're going to get, of what we were like. our ancestors were like 5, 6, 7, 8 million years ago. And so when you look at human nature that way, you can now begin to sort out the biology from the culture. It's the hardest part when you're looking at a human today. If you looked at me or you and said, what's biological and what's cultural, but if you go back to the beginning and say, well, you haven't got culture, you haven't got language, and you haven't got a big neocortex, or even these big emotion centers,
Right.
What were we like? Well, we're very probably the best example. I think probably in relationships, we were like an orangutan, very weak tie. Probably temperamentally, because that's we shared the last common ancestor at 5 million years ago with the common chimp. We're an evolved chimpanzee essentially, and chimps are aggressive. Of all the great apes, chimps are the most aggressive. So we're aggressive, and it was probably a good thing if we had to survive out in the savannah. But the problem is aggression, and then you take the area that generates both positive and negative emotions, you double it in size, and you add it to an aggressive animal. What are you going to get? An aggressive human, and that's one of the problems. And you're also going to have a lot of trouble always sustaining groups. You have to work at it all the time. No group naturally forms in bonds and stays. It's constantly, it has to be created and recreated and created. I mean, lions can be in a pride and they can start chewing each other up because they get mad at each other, but they don't leave because they got bioprogrammers saying, stay here. And we don't have that. We get divorced, we walk out, we ghost people on the internet and all this kind of thing. So that's a very different human. Now the tricky part is the natural selection changed our brains so dramatically.
I just wanted to ask you about that. It's that like we have two parts of our human nature, let's say, or two human natures. One part of our human nature is great ape at our core, which we inherited from our last common ancestor that we share with great apes. And the other part is that additional layer that natural selection built into our brains in order to get organized or die in the open savannah.
That's right. And so that's the tricky part. And that's what the way I analyzed it, the way I conceptualized it is you take sort of all the inherited, biologically based capacities that great apes have, like for language. Great apes, our brains are wired for language. Great ape can't talk because they don't have the tongues and the lips and the larynx to do it. They don't have a Broca's area versus right here, which translates brain thinking into speech. They just don't have even the musculars and stuff to finally articulate words like we can. So, but they could talk to us through sign language, or they could, and they naturally learn English if they put in an infant chimpanzee in an English-speaking environment or Japanese-speaking environment. They'll learn the language. They'll understand you. I was watching the other day. You may have heard of Penny Patterson and Coco, the famous gorilla that was at least in America, National Geographic was always being displayed. And when she used sign language to talk to Coco would sign back in sign language. She would, for the camera, she would talk when she's signing. So she would start talking. I'm going to do this, and Coco was already responding. He didn't need the sign language. He was understanding her. I don't think she really realized how much Coco knew how to hear her English. It was automatic expansion. And you go to Coco, I remember going to, my wife went down to Coco, the famous bonobo chimp, and Coco had never seen her before. And she would do things like say, go flush the toilet, Coco. And she'd go flush the toilet and come here and give me a kiss. Give me a kiss. And so they clearly understand it. It's hardwired. It saves an awful lot of trouble for natural selection. I think if we hadn't had already hardwired capacity for language in our brains, we probably never would have existed. So all it had to do was somehow get it so we could use that neurological capacity, and that was the biggest thing, not the neurological capacity of your language, but getting the tongues, the lips, and everything else. And there's a whole bunch of FOXP1 and FOXP2 gene enhancers that were involved in converting our brains and our muscular and our genetic makeup so we could speak in a finely articulated way. Once we can do that, of course, we can have symbolic culture. We can represent anything,
Yeah.
own thoughts and the thoughts of others, or any situation with artificial symbols. No other animal can do that. I think probably elephants and porpoises, very intelligent animals, and probably some birds can do it to a degree. Nothing like we can do it. So that changed everything. And so that with natural selection worked, enhanced emotions, that allowed you to grow the neocortex. With that and the growth of the neocortex, you now have and a little bit of rewiring for your so your Sylvian Fisher, you have all these muscle errors here that allow me to speak as rapidly as I often speak. A chimp or a gorilla or a orangutan can't do that. And so you do that, and then it's just a matter of time of using words to denote things that are meaningful and have common meanings. And then you start creating sentences and so on and so forth. The great apes can do all that. They can't do it with words, but they can learn language to about the level of a 3-year-old child, which actually can speak fairly well in simple ways. But they don't need it for the way they have to adapt. But we did, and so by happenstance, once you have the emotion centers, you grow the brain. Because it would be fitness enhancing to grow the brain.
Yeah.
If you grow the brain without being able to create a smarter animal, able to make better decisions more rapidly, you're just creating a giant warehouse that consumes 30% of your protein and your calories. That's what it takes for this brain to go. You may think it's going to your belly sometimes, but it's really going, most of it's going to here. Because it's a very complex system that needs a lot of protein and a lot of calories. And so once that happens, that's what, so the emotions created the cognitions led to speech led to culture, and there's all these feedback loops. Once that all the fitness is happening, it works back and says selection works that direction some more. It makes the brain larger, makes speech better, encourages culture. It facilitates adaptation to the environment. And so I sort of box that and say that all those back and forth feedbacks among those things, emotions, cognitions, language, and culture is what I call the elaboration machine. And so when you take human nature, the biology we inherited from the chimps, and you just put it into this machine that's grinding away and spit it out the other end, you get human nature as it's modified by the capacities we have for language, culture, for high levels of cognition, and for emotions. And so that's where it gets. Is this all biological when it comes out? Probably not. But you can get a sense for, if you take this and just feed it through and then see what it's like. You know what it's like with gorillas and chimps and orangutans. You feed it through the liberation machines. It comes out as certain kinds of behavioral propensities of humans. You can pretty much get a good idea of what's biological and what's probably cultural. You can now at least separate it a little bit in a way you can't do it. So if I started with just humans and try to work back without knowing the biology of any of this and how it's interacted and how it's evolved, you know how it's evolved and interacted with this and that low and comes out, now you can go back because you have a trail to follow. You just go reverse.
Yeah.
And so when I finished the human nature book, it's not like some one nature or it's not even bioprogrammers. It's just a series of behavioral capacities and some propensities. That is, there is some kind of push to behave this way. And it's complex. It's not simple. Yeah. And so I call it the complex. Like I have the labels for them. I remember the labels. There's the cognitive complex. There's the psychology complex. It's mostly need states leading to things you need and want. There's probably more to that I talked about. The interaction complex, all the things we do in interaction, the emotions complex, and the community complex, which is the complex of that's got some bioprogrammers. We were naturally oriented to communities. We easily identify with community. Hard with groups, we have to work at it constantly. And so it ends up being probably 10 pages of things that I've listed under these complexes, single space, so it's fairly long, of capacities and propensities. And I've categorized in this way. They overlap a little bit, but that's okay, the overlap. I just want to have these sort of lists of capacities. And I feel confident that they're right, because I started way back 13 million years ago with the common ancestors of orangutans with and then started back 8 million years ago with gorillas and 5 million years ago with chimpanzees. So now I'm pretty confident that I've got the biology. I know what the biology was. That's the hard part.
Right.
I know exactly, because I've got this, it's a metaphor, but I actually do a lot of fairly detailed analysis of what the brain is doing to these things. Because lots of things you can see on our genetic code. I know how the brain's wired, and I know what it's able to do to some of these things that feed through it and come out as this evolved human. So I call this the sort of evolved human nature, which is very much affected by our capacity for abstract thought, for to denote any cognition with emotions, to denote any cognition or emotion with a word or a phrase, and then to store these things that are created by meanings. Language creates meanings, and those meanings can be linked together into texts and all kinds of belief systems. And so that's, I think it's pretty easy to understand what culture did. Now, if you look at the ethnographies of hunters and gatherers, that's one of the places I always look. I get the earliest. I don't want to deal with complex human beings in modern societies because there's been a lot of culture.
Right.
But you start back, what as they were evolved great apes. Everything went through the survivor regime. They're just as smart as we are. The brains are wired a little bit differently, but not much. The CTs and stuff, the size and everything about the same as modern humans. And you can kind of see this is how humans lived for 350,000 years. We got to remember that probably for even you can make the case for 400,000 years, because you can keep pushing back the first Homo back to 350 to 400,000 years. The time in which frame is that basically for 99% of our time on Earth, we were nomadic hunters and gatherers. There were probably some more settled ones and a few other, maybe a little horticulture here and there along the way, but basically that's the case. And so it's only over the last 10,000 years, and really accelerating about 5,000 years ago, that we began to create large urban societies, the kinds of societies we live in today. Well, nothing's happened biologically to us. All we've done is our culture and our languages are no more sophisticated, but our culture is, because we can write it down and accumulate it and teach it and that kind of thing. And so I'm really confident with these behavioral propensities that I'm calling the complexes of those labels that I had,
Right.
pretty accurate, because we've only had 10,000 years to really, maybe 100,000 years from now, you could have some biological and cultural re-evolution along the way, but it's not been long enough to change something like 5,000 years of evolutionary time is nothing. The evolution is all sociocultural. And I don't really think our human nature has changed because we probably pretty much respond to situations as we have to. I think I consider hunting and gathering, nomadic hunting and gathering was really well attuned. If you read all these pages, I haven't shown them to you because it's long, but I'll send anyone a book. I got copies of them, on a PDF file. You can read them. But what it means is that we've created a series of what I call, my wife and I have called cages. The cage of kinship initially with horticulture, the cage of power with agrarian societies. And only with sort of post-industrial societies have we liberated this individualistic, free-spirited great ape. And those cages were not nice places for humans. We're not an animal that likes to be caged. Lots of animals do like to be caged, but not a human. We're a great ape. We're individualistic. We don't form groups naturally. We're emotional as hell. We really can think a lot and think very, very rapidly as well. And I think what happened, once you couldn't go back to hunting and gathering because there were just too many people, you can't go back to hunting and gathering because people start hunting each other now probably as prey. So you have to stumble forward of building more and more complex societies. And each one of those along the way was pretty miserable. And I don't know if Soviet Russia is a very pleasant place to live. Or I wouldn't imagine so, but who knows? I've only have been there in 20 years. It looked very nice to me 20 years ago. And so, well, it was even more than 30 years. Yeah, 20 years it was looking kind of going to be being liberated. It was going to be okay, but so did a big regression. So the modern post-industrial and sociologists spend a lot of time critiquing capitalism and all that. And I get that, but it does one thing: it gives people a lot of freedom. It gives them a lot of freedom to fail and be poor and whatnot. There's still stratification. There's still all the things that are bad about human societies that hurt humans. But there is this one thing: you have some opportunities to choose and make decisions about what you want to do, where you want to be, what you want to buy, and that's heaven for a great ape. I don't think a highly programmed mammal like a lion would actually like that. And
but
you wouldn't like it either.
But on the other hand, there is technology. Like, I mean, what can you say about the relation between our evolved human nature and today's advanced technology, like video games, social networks like Facebook and stuff like that? I mean, it seems that like these social medias are not good for us in sense that they are not satisfying our needs we have as a great ape.
Yeah, I think if you look at what a great ape, evolved great ape like humans wants is freedom and choice, the ability to move around, to have weak ties. Weak ties are fairly important. You don't have to have very many strong ties, but you do as a human. Now we are much more emotionally enhanced than as any of the great apes. So we do need strong emotional ties, not just the family, with a few emotional ties. You don't need a ton of them, and lots of weak ties. But the social media, the problem what social media does is just that, it mediates. What we need is lots of face-to-face weak ties, and you don't need that many because it would be too exhausting to have too many really close friends because of all the emotions involved, and you have a friendship that's going to be sustained among a human has to be sustained by face-to-face interaction and the arousal of the emotions when you're in face-to-face with somebody, and even Zoom doesn't do it. Now, maybe if we got really high definition TVs, I actually did an experiment. Instead of doing my Mac, which has which is a super ultra LED, but it's only 21 inches. And I went out to my big screen TV, and one of my granddaughters was at university in Paris. I found a graduate student who would tell me how to do it. I don't have graduate students anymore, but they're still a pretty loyal group. Tell me how to do it, how to hook up the TV so I could do a Zoom. So I did a Zoom, but still she's life size now, and I can see much more fine grained emotions, but it's still not the same thing as having it right there, and that's very important. And I just have an article by a sociologist here in America, Will Kalikanoff, showing that he's got some real data showing that it mediated interaction, via just even something like Zoom, but certainly Facebook and all these other things, and Twitter, and if he's exceeding one, is not as emotionally gratifying as is face-to-face. And so the greater proportion of your relationships are mediated via checking your email all the time and your Facebook and so on and so forth, the less gratifying life is. In fact, what this tragedy is, it's like heroin. You get addicted to it,
Right.
and you do more and more, but it doesn't give you the high anymore because it's not real. It's not a real face-to-face with human beings where you see the flesh and skin. You can literally touch them and kiss them, smell them, and that's what humans need. And humans don't like constraint, but obviously we're realistic. We have to accept constraint because there's no going back to nomadic hunting and gathering. You've got to live. You got to make a living. So we can suck it up and be in a bureaucracy or a factory and work as long as we have other hours where we can be a grade A. And that's why humans love to do carnival, and they love to go to bars. They love to eat out. That's what's been so hard in this pandemic, is they can't do any of those things that a grade A would like to do, which was be with, don't even have to be strong ties. It's been interesting for me to check this out, because at my age, and I have a lot of vulnerability to bronchial things. I've had pneumonia 4 or 5 times in my life and almost died from it 5 years ago. So I really isolated myself, and I live in a community. It's guarded by gates with guys with guns, and I never thought that would be a plus, but I begin to think it might be a plus now. Yeah. I live in a nice Jack Nicklaus golf course, and it's very rural and beautiful. But you really do get kind of lonely here. And I have my wife, and we have a kitten now, so that's helped my life a lot. But I found it. Lots of people walk around here. In fact, the early part of it, when everyone was home and no one was able to go to work, all these families were out, and they were having such a good time. I hadn't seen, family, the dog, and the mother and the father and kids are all, and they're just turning on and just laughing and joking and having a terrific time, just doing what a great ape would love to do. Yeah. And when they go, before they'd be all their cell phones, they'd be in soccer practice and this practice and that orchestra, or what, they'd eat at different times, hardly ever see each other. And that was not very gratifying, but you just see, this looks out to the street, and that looks out to the golf course behind me. And it was just amazing to see the animation. That's the only way I can phrase it. They would be skipping along like teenagers skipping along, turning to mom and dad and talking. Teenagers don't do stuff like that. They got to be cool. But no, they're just into it. And the dog's there. Sometimes the cat was being dragged along. Only the cat wanted to go because they had a leash on a cat. That's not the best thing. Cats are even worse than humans. They want to be left alone. So at any rate, you can just see what they really were craving, and that their lives are most of the time evolved by mediated interactions in Facebook and Twitter and what all these things are. And I think humans are, it really is like when you get resistance to heroin, the effects of heroin, at some point you go dead. And there's this data, this one article showing that people are not emotionally satisfied as they could be. And so one of the things that this study of human nature convinced me, I already felt this. I always felt media is a complete a waste of time in many ways. This is very convenient to have Zoom, but I will allow, for example, my email to be on my cell phone, because I spend all day on a computer writing, and I look at my email 50 times a day. And if I had a cell phone, I'd be like all the other zombies out there. And one of the things I notice, one of the things I like to do when I'm sitting, when I couldn't sit with people, I like to look at people. Sociologists like to look. Basically, what they do now is look at their phone. Yeah. and they're scrolling through,
Irritating, yeah,
they
it's
don't even
very
look
irritating.
up. And once in a while they come up for air and if they see me looking at them, then I think I'm some kind of pervert. I'm just a sociologist interested. Why would you be obsessed with this phone? What is in there that's so great?
Yeah.
No, it's just, it's like taking heroin. You can't, it probably has an initial kind of fun, but it gets old and because it's not real, it's mediated. And what humans really need is face-to-face interaction. That's why I think Europe it's happened in America too, is eating out has become a very important thing. Sitting around with friends, cafes, eating, and that's being denied now. In California, it's starting to let it happen again, but they'll probably have to stop it because there'll be another surge in the pandemic. But that's what great apes are, and that's what they like. Is weak ties, a lot of weak tie relationships, fun, relaxing, arousing emotions, and then going home and being alone, and being yourself, and then having a few strong relationships. That's the ultimate thing. So any kind of social structural system that gets in the way of that. Okay, and you can really see it as a thought experiment. The pandemic is getting in the way of what great apes naturally want to do. They don't want to hang out with mom and dad all day. They want to do that part of that and have that strong relationship. They want to also have those weak ties out there. And I found when I walk outside, can't walk as far as I used to be able to walk, but I just enjoyed saying hello to all the people. There's a whole normative structure inside this community of 650 homes. That you always wave when you pass somebody in the car, and you always say hello to somebody. And that, you do that 5 or 6 times with people you've seen before, but you don't really know them. It's very emotionally gratifying because we're just apes. It's not enough alone, but to miss that is a lot. So the texture of life for an evolved ape is to live in a community and have a real sense that I'm a member of this community and I identify with it. I identify very powerfully with California, for example. I'm a 4th generation Californian. There's not very many of us actually around because it takes us back to the early 1800s before state. And I identify very hard with that. That's why I've always lived in California. I went to school for 3 years away from California, and I leaped right back into it as soon as I could because I like the culture of it. And that's one important. You have to have that identified. That's why we easily identify with our country and have a nation is just a more larger community of constant civics who speak the same language. So that's a very great ape thing. And then within that, you have a few strong ties. And a lot, maybe not a lot, but I'd say a number of around 20 pretty good weak ties. And that's hog heaven for a great ape. And if you can keep the repression down from the state and whatnot and have markets that give people opportunities and a good job structure and an educational system that can train people so they can get access to money and goods and services they want. So modern post-industrial societies actually, if you can't go back to the Garden of Eden of nomadic hunting and gathering, it's pretty good, about as good as we're going to get, I think, given the size of the populations of the Earth. It's pretty close. It's as good as if everyone could be a society like Norway or Scandinavia, but those are small societies. So I'm not sure a China or the US could be, because we're so big, quite the same. But that's about what we can be. The only other way to realize our ape heritage or our evolved human nature is to go back and be a hunter and gatherer. Yeah. Well, that's not going to happen because there's too many of us, man. So, we could kill ourselves off. Might be a few left, and they can start off. Yeah, but the point is, that's what an exercise like this does. So and I think people realize this. The studies are showing that the suicide rate among teenagers in America is very high because of people take Facebook seriously. If someone ghosts you or doesn't like what you.
And TikTok is the newest technology.
I remember my grandkids when they were teenagers. They didn't like me. I said, who cares? How close a friend is this?
Yeah.
Well, no. Find some good friends and forget about the Facebook. Of course, I didn't take my.
Great stuff. Where is the place for the religion in this story about the interaction of natural selection and human nature? If I got it right, it seems that you are not prone to this adaptionist position, which states that like there is some religious module in our brain.
Yeah. Well, this is the book that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I wrote this book deliberately with people who know something about religion, because I mean, I've written about religion in some institutions, but I'm not really a religious scholar. So this is my wife, Alexandra Marinsky, who taught religion for many years. And she and I do a lot of, she's the one who got me into the biology and everything. And these two people are two Dutch religious scholars, one's an anthropologist, one's an historian. So we did this project together. So I wouldn't say something really stupid that would be wrong. And they agreed pretty much with the sort of way I wanted to outline the theory of it. And it goes something like this, and it goes back to what I was talking about, emotions. If you think about, it takes a fairly big brain to conceptualize another universe that's not in the here and now on Earth. And that's what religion is ultimately. It's the conception of another plane of existence with supernatural forces and beings inhabiting that, who have the power to influence what goes on in your daily life. That's the sort of selling point of religion. And so a really dumb animal is probably not going to be religious because they can't make that abstraction. Now, it's conceivable that, but who knows what size the brain has to be, but it has to be pretty big, I think. I don't think cats are religious. I don't think dogs are religious. No, I wouldn't want to say anything about an elephant or a porpoise. They conceptualize communities and broader things like that. In fact, our capacity to orient to community is our major, we naturally orient to the world beyond us, beyond this, people right around us, but to the larger community in which we all exist. That gets you halfway to being religion. All you have to, it's just a little bit step further to go to the supernatural. So my idea, the way I thought the book is, we don't have a bioprogrammer. That's one of the, see again, a lot of the people who try to do the biology of religion start with humans today without thinking about how humans got here. And they do, you know, some of this seems ridiculous to me. So for example, one book says a very prominent person who does lots of interesting work in religion, but I think this is, can't be, I don't think it's true. He says, and it's called Religion Explained. And the explanation is, he's an evolutionary psychologist, so this is how evolutionary psychologists talk, that religion is a byproduct of a cheater detection mechanism. Humans wanted to make sure they weren't being cheated by people, you know, they're marital wise or an exchange or something like that. And humans are, all mammals are oriented to that. It's natural. It's biological. That is something that's hardwired in us to assess the values of things and to assess reciprocity and exchanges. But he said there's this cheater detection mechanism, and somehow that's going to explain God and religion and social control that religion exerts. It doesn't tell us where this cheater mechanism is. That's one of the problems of evolutionary psychology. You know, I say these mechanisms are wired in the brain, but I'm someone who knows something about the brain. I don't know where that's wired. I generally say it's wired in the big neocortex with emotions, but there's no center or module for it. That's ridiculous. But they're starting with humans as we are. And so if you go back to how humans got to be the way we are and go right up the bat, you know, starting with the biology of it, just working right up to the front and doing. That's one of the things I've done a lot. I just finished my 4th book on institutions. This was called The First Institutions, how do they come about? How did kinship emerge, and how did economy emerge, and polity and religion? Anyway, so my argument is simply this: that if you take an animal and make it emotional, and essentially when you're emotional, you're scaring yourself to death half the time, or worrying about things and have anxiety, and especially if you create emotions like shame and guilt. They weren't created for religion, but they're very unique emotions for humans. Your dog doesn't have shame or guilt. None of the higher mammals that we know do. It's conceivable maybe with elephants and dolphins, but I'm doubtful. When your dog cowers and you're scolding it for doing something, it's not feeling guilt, it's just feeling fear. You're the alpha male or female, and you're mad at it, and he's scared, and he's not saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm guilty. I'm so ashamed of myself." They don't feel that way. If you weren't around, they do it again, and whatever it is, they did it wrong. And so it's a very unique human emotion, and it's one of the ones I've spent a lot of time thinking about, because guilt and shame are great emotions of social control. Because if you think, if we didn't have guilt and shame, we'd always have to control ourselves by external sanctions from others, or fear of external sanctions from others. But with feelings of guilt and shame, we sanction ourselves. We don't want to feel guilty. We don't want to feel shameful, because these are two of the most painful emotions that humans have to experience. And it seems to be completely unique to us. It's probably the result of rewiring the brain for more emotions, and then neocortex growing. It comes from that. Well, religion comes from that as a byproduct of that evolution to make us more social. So we enhance the emotions, and then once you have the enhanced emotions, growing the brain is fitness enhancing, leading to speech and culture. And once you have speech and culture now, you can start designating a universe that's not here, and beings and forces in that universe that are not here. If you can't speak, you can't do that. Only speaking animals can do that. And then not only that, you can create all kinds of conceptions of the nature of great texts, the lives and foibles of all these supernatural forces and beings, and what they can do to us. And we scare ourselves to death. So religion is a kind of byproduct of that. But it's not just a byproduct. Religion in the early patterns of human social organization was probably very critical to social control, because as societies got bigger, the capacity to control things was not so easy. It was kinship initially. Kinship could be a very effective way of controlling things, but when you have these big extended families of lineages, and then clans and subclans and phratries and moieties, submoieties, and it's all linked in it. It looks like an organization chart. It looks like a big bureaucracy, except it's all kinfolk. And so your position in that big bureaucracy oftentimes subordinates you to your mother-in-law or something like that. That's a system full of explosive emotions. So you got to get that under control. And religion is a pretty good way. You got to do that, or the gods are going to take care of you. And then when that system starts to break down, and you start creating the cage of power and building up the state, well, that's not pleasant either. And so it's easier to get social control by sort of say that God is watching you.
Yeah.
That's the big gods theory, and it's probably basically right. It's a very effective way of controlling people, because we are sensitive to emotions. We're particularly sensitive to fear, anger, shame, and guilt. And actually, I think these both guilt and shame are built from the three negative emotions. The dominant emotion is sadness and disappointment, anger and fear, and it's reversely anger and fear, and one gets you guilt, and one gets you shame. And it's a very powerful neurological thing to have, because it creates self-control in a way that's not otherwise possible. And not only that, once you have the capacity for language and culture, you can create codes, moral codes that are essentially instruction rules saying, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do something else. And you can just constantly monitor yourself. It takes a great burden off all the other people around you. It takes also a burden off social structures to control you, because you do it yourself. And then if you don't do it, they put you away somewhere. They isolate you, or they shame you and put you out of well, if you don't do that in hunting and gathering, they kill you or tell you to go away, and you'll die if you have to try to survive alone in an open country savannah. And other societies, they'll just throw you in jail. And so that gets so lots of times you don't do things because of fear. But the point is, when you have an external force that can harm you, when you violate the rules, and the rules are now spelled out, they're not always written down, but they're understood by everybody because you grew up with them and learned them. So it helps to have power out there to control things, monitor and control. But much more effective is to make people monitor and control themselves. And what better way than to have the fear of the supernatural intervening and hurting them? And so that's a pretty powerful, especially if you believe, it's a very powerful force. And it was, I think, in early society, it was very necessary for us. Not only can it control you, but it also provides a vehicle through prayer and ritual activities in the context of some kind of church or bureaucratic structure organized around priests and stuff, to release a lot of emotions and to experience the positive emotions that come from interacting rituals with people who believe the same thing you do. That's very gratifying for a human. It's also very ape-like. Apes do create rituals like that and do have carnivals and stuff. They like to get co-present, gather as a crowd, and experience emotions simultaneously. That's something that great apes do, and that all humans do. And so if you that becomes in turn a very effective means of social control, because you are not only praying to God to forgive you for your sins and make you feel not so worried about it anymore that you done something wrong, but you're there collectively doing it. And that's always a kind of an emotional high for a great ape, an intelligent emotion animal like we are. And then it also leads to social control of larger populations. So that if you simultaneously you go simultaneously all over the world 5 times a day to Mecca, point yourself to Mecca. What a powerful form of social control.
Yeah. Right.
And you need it. You need every hook you can get in a big complex society to have lots of social control, because otherwise these big emotional animals that we are, who can think and do plan and be quite mischievous with our big brains, you've got to have lots of hooks for social control, because people can't always control themselves, and some people just don't want to try to control themselves because they're crooks, they're sociopaths, and so on. So religion was a very important thing. It's obviously still important for people because it's worldwide, and it's probably less important to many people in post-industrial societies than it once was. Data seem to show that. Societies are slowly secularizing. I don't know if they'll go all the way that way, because religion, I'm not religious, but I do go to church every so often just to see what it's like. And I have friends, I have minister friends, and they invite me to come, they hear their thing, and I can see people seem very happy. They're enjoying themselves, and I can see what it gives people. It gives them that little solidarity they need, and then they go home and they feel refreshed, they feel secure, they feel like they've done what they had to do to protect themselves from any kind of evil things that happen. That's a real ape thing. So that's the origin of religion. It's not very dramatic. It is a byproduct of just being intelligent and having a lot of emotions. And it's also a byproduct of the fact that only humans, I think, probably experience guilt and shame. And if you experience guilt and shame, and people who chronically experience guilt and shame suffer terribly. And so there has to be a way to alleviate that from people. Now today we go see psychotherapists and things like that to relieve ourselves of our shame and our guilt. But it's a low cost solution just to go pray to God in a church. And if it gives you that feeling of relief, you can see why it works and why religion. Of course, religion understands that. People who practice religion understand that. They don't cynically understand it and manipulate it, in most cases anyhow. But they understand that dynamic, and so that leads to the institutionalization of religion. And eventually polity doesn't want to deal with religion anymore because it allows religion to help with social control, and then only that, and then it relies upon religion to legitimate power. Polity is at a weak point. So at some point during early and late agrarianism, governments try to sort of isolate religion, let them be the place where people are doing people and their emotional issues. But we're gonna legitimate ourselves with more secularized ideologies, maybe it's religious content, but you're not going to be the mediator of it. And in fact, in the early days, the temples of, say, in Jerusalem and whatnot, they were not religious. They were political centers too. And the clergy, while a very special member of the bureaucracy, was still a member of the polity's bureaucracy. But what happened eventually is religion tried to get more autonomous and get more control. Most institutional systems try to do that to sort of not be dominated by other institutions, and so they seek autonomy, and the priests who are entrepreneurs, they get out there and they do that, and for a while they have polity at its bind, because polity needs the justification for what they do, which is usually some pretty awful coercive things. And so it has to be justified by the gods wanting it, and the priests have to be willing to sanctify the political leaders. But eventually they realize their future is not with religion, because it makes you dependent upon the priesthood. So you start to isolate the priesthood and separate your power. But you got to make a bargain. You make the bargain with the devil here. You've got to make a bargain that you're going to leave religion alone and let them be sort of isolated as dominating the sphere of spiritual needs of individuals. The polity will make the decisions about what the society does. And that's pretty much what happens, except in a few cases today you can see. Even there, I'm not sure how viable in a modern world democracies like Iran are in the long run. The only thing it's saving them is got a lot of oil. When the oil runs out, they're going to be in big trouble.
Right. Can you tell me in what degree human nature takes part in creating a social stratification? I mean, today, most of the sociologists, especially Marxists, think that human nature has nothing to do with social justification. They think that with the abolition of, for example, capitalism, or inequalities would vanish. I mean, can you tell me about the relation?
I think they're. Well, Marx had a certain image. He's got a dialectic that looks very much like things proposed to Hegel. Instead of the final stage of the unity with a God, it's now communist society. And lunch with Gorbachev or someone like Putin. That's not exactly paradise. I feel very sorry for the Russians because, anyway. So, in fact, this book we just finished, we talked about the evolution of kinship or religion. Well, the first institution was kinship. The second was polity. Polity actually begins to differentiate out before religion. Religion stays buried in kinship for a long time. And then religion, and then the economy, and then law, and then the economy with law that can regulate markets and whatnot. It has that takeoff point to modernity. And so the subtitle of the book is From Foraging to the Brink of Modernity. And that institutional basis, those institutions, those first 5 institutions, becoming somewhat autonomous from each other but interconnected, is the base upon which modernity could evolve under certain conditions. I'm not sure, for example, if modernity would have evolved if the Roman Empire had continued. You have political domination to such a high degree, it really puts a damper on markets. And in the end, modernity depends upon markets. The markets have to have legal they have to have contracts, and you have to have a whole system of adjudication of disputes and laws, secular laws, tort laws. And something like the Hanseatic League tells you exactly what it was probably like, because there wasn't a political power to go across all of Northern Europe in, say, 1300s and 1400s and 1500s. So you create the Hanseatic League of various city governments and sort of regional powers negotiating a legal system, and usually trying to, so you have something from Gdansk to London, and then going all the way across Germany and down the rivers to places like Lubeck and stuff, that or Bremen or what's the Berlin even. So anyway, it created a legal system that could regulate trade, and that's what was needed. When Rome dominated that part of Europe, you couldn't do that because you weren't going to have markets. Now it was free of polity. You could get the legal system could evolve to the point where you could regulate trade and exchange in markets, and then everything, then money and all the instruments around money, banking, insuring, and so on and so forth, could emerge, and that's what allowed modernity to exist. So that's sort of what we were doing, and it has a lot of implications for what you're talking about. Now, at the end of the book, we run a chapter on stratification because it's very important, because all the time these institutions are evolving, stratification is evolving. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. It gets a little better after agrarianism, but it's still pretty bad. I mean, there's very high inequality in America, for example. And there's less inequality in some places, but there's always, most societies have a fairly high degree of inequality. Scandinavian countries are the closest postmodern societies that have reduced inequality, but there's still inequality. It's just that no one at the base at the bottom is suffering like they do in the United States. I don't know where you are, what the situation is, but and so stratification always creates selection pressures for social control. Because when people are denied access to resources, and they can see other people getting those resources, and they see that they have no chance to get these resources, they're experiencing all kinds of negative emotions. They can go from depression, which sort of demobilizes people. That's what you want. If you were a dictator, you want people to be depressed. They're not going to fight much. But it also goes, the other side of that is anger, and fear can lead to anger. And so all those negative emotions eventually lead to mobilizations of one kind or another to reduce stratification and inequality. But for long periods of time, the systems last because the people without power don't have the resources to mount effective counter movements. So the stratification remains the biggest problem of modern societies, because the existence of stratification means that some people are not being allowed to be a great ape, to achieve what they want, to have options and choices. And so, and great apes do get mad, and they've got those subcortical areas of their brain that generate very intense emotions, and it's just a matter of time till someone mobilizes. I think it's remarkable, for example, what's going on in Russia right now. These are pretty brave people. They're really mad because they're confronting a very dictatorial man who will think nothing of it. Think about poisoning their leader a couple different times, and arresting him when he gets off the airplane, probably poison him again when he's in prison. This time, do the job right, get rid of him. And they're out there, more remarkably for California, in 40-degree weather, protesting. These are pretty gutsy people. And they're really, really pissed off. So stratification always does that. In the United States, we got a terrible problem. We've got too many poor people. We have a lot of rich people, we're able to live incredible lives. I'm able to live as a college professor an incredibly affluent life. But I know darn well there are all these other people who are not getting much of a life at all, and I always support causes trying to give them money, and I encourage them to tax me some more and give it to someone else, and because it's not right. To me, it's not morally right, but that's just a judgment. But it's always been. Once you left the Garden of Eden of hunting and gathering, horticulture had a lot of inequality within the kinship system, which makes it even doubly worse because there's inequality by your relatives and stuff. That's terrible. But then once you have the state had an interest in collecting money to support itself, isolating religion so it didn't have to deal with that anymore. It was inevitable that you're going to have this inequality just keep going up higher and higher and higher to the peak of the agrarian area. Then it came down a little bit with industrialization and post-industrialization. But I have a substance on it. I think it's going back up. In America, inequality is going back up a bit. We had some big changes in the 60s by the social movements, pretty much worldwide, did change. I mean, we have this very unique, because of the former slaves, and then in case in the U.S. now, lots of immigration. But the United States has always been a land of immigrants, and that's its great strength, because people come hungry and desperate, or they're really willing to work hard, and they've been able to do things, and they're still able to do that. It's just remarkable, for example, that it's not too long. California is 40 million people. It's this fourth or fifth largest economy in the world by itself. It's dynamite. It's the origin of the internet, computer, and about everything else that goes around the world. And it's got a huge agricultural belt too in its valley. It produces more fruits and fruits and vegetables than any other state in the United States. It's got a huge agricultural component too, and so there's still opportunities, even with 40 million people. I don't know. The economy is so dynamic. So there are people coming, and at the university we see it. In fact, today the University of California announced that it had the largest application pool of like 300,000 students who want to come to the University of California, and it's the most diverse. So it actually has it's diverse in the proportions that are right. Eligible students of all backgrounds, pretty much proportionate to what they are in the general population. This has been the University of California across its 10 campuses is trying to get to, and they finally gotten there. And that means, and then the state college system, which is the biggest state college system in the world, has 22 campuses. It has 700,000 students. The University of California has 250,000 students, but it's a little more selective. Those two systems, plus 1,000 junior colleges, two-year colleges, communities, are set up to do one thing: allow people to be upwardly mobile. So, but the problem is those who are left behind are really behind now. They fall further and further behind once who can get out and get middle-class jobs. And that's a real problem. And that's why we have gangs and all kinds of problems. Yeah. And, so you can't, most industrialism doesn't allow you to escape stratification. In fact, it makes it worse in many ways, because you could see, you have all this media exposing yourself to what you don't have, all this affluence. And you can see it. You walk around, you're free to walk around and watch everyone be rich, and you're poor. And how does that make you feel? Well, you're not well, and no wonder people. Yeah, and that's to a greater or less extent true all over the world. And in some societies like China just try to crush it, but 1.4 or 3 or 4 billion people, I'm not sure how long you can repress it. You can repress it right now because there's growth, but China's day is coming. It can't continue to grow like this and become more and more repressive dissent. Something's got to give in that. And the stratification is actually quite high, but it's very much like American stratification, linked to ethnicity. The imports of people who they export in the factories don't give them much. At some point, they're going to rebel, even in a place like China, where they have pretty good social control. So I don't know what part. See, the Eastern European world, I don't know. That's yet to sort itself out. It's still dealing with the sort of autonomy or not autonomy that the various nation states are going to have. That's the so stratification is the biggest problem in any society, probably at any given time.
Yeah.
And it just creates anger. Frustration, leads to social movements, probably fosters crime and other kinds of deviance. And the result is it creates huge social control problems. Religion's not going to handle that problem. Only coercive, and that's not the thing. If you do coercively repress people, they'll get angrier and more more clever and get more well-wise. So it always is. It always has been the single biggest problem in most societies. So for all that institutions do to provide an institutional base for adaptation to the environment in a kind of evolutionary sense, they also systematically increase stratification, which creates a whole new set of selection pressures. I mean, humans create the environment to which they have to adapt. So now we're creating an environment of high levels of inequality linked to differences in religion and ethnicity. You talk about a volatile mix that is. And the issue is, how do you control it? Well, if you try to repress it, that's a short-term solution. But in a 40, 50-year perspective, that's not a viable solution. The effort has been to increase opportunities and bring everyone up, but that means you have to do some redistribution of the wealth. And places like the United States has a lot of wealthy people, and they don't want to give up their money. They should. I think for their own survival in the long run, they better give up, so they're going to be in trouble. But so it's the biggest problem now facing every society in the world. And in some cases, it's a problem of survival for certain people. They're not getting enough food or anything, healthcare or whatever. And, you see the distribution of the shots for the pandemic. The poor people aren't able to get them. They don't have medical care in America. They don't. And they're always worried about maybe the people from Latin America. Some portion of them are illegally. They can't, although by law they have to be given medical care. They're afraid. They just don't have access to it. And then, of course, the Americans completely botched the distribution of it, so that it's hard to get a shot. Period. In California, there's 40 million people, and only 2 million have been given shots. in a month of distribution. I just got my first shot yesterday, and I was glad to get it. But I've got my second one coming up. I've already got the appointment for that. In fact, I have to take my wife down Sunday to get her first shot.
That's great.
Particular, yeah. But even that, see that, and so your exposure to disease, flus, poverty, and hunger, and malnutrition all increase. So at some point, people won't take it anymore. They will revolt. We are apes. They will eventually revolt. They will organize and revolt. And so it's a problem all over the world. The Russians are worried about it. They have to bring out the police. I can see about Americans that tend to be sort of silly about this thing, but the Russians, I figure they got better social control than anybody, but maybe not.
I agree with you.
I gotta say this, great people. I have more power to them. I think it's wonderful, actually.
So, Jonathan, the last topic I want to ask you about is positivistic sociology. I mean, your position on that is that in order to sociology be to meet requirements of modern scientific theory, sociology needs to be a positivistic.
That's one of the reasons I've always consistently written on institutions. A lot of it's more descriptive. I'm just trying to look at the evolution of them. But in the 3-volume books, the theoretical principles of, you see, those are my books on the wall.
Yeah, I see them. Yeah,
they're the tops, the top row right over there. Those are those 3 book volumes. I tried to say what are the generic properties of the social universe, and so I don't even talk about economies. I talk about production as a force and distribution as a force. So you have to first of all break institutions that sort of puts things together. There's an economy, there's a polity, but then when I went out and really explained, like a physicist would explain the social world, I get into this fundamental thing, properties. I don't use the labels for institutions. And so I started with a very simple conceptual scheme of what are the fundamental properties of all societies. And that's where you got to begin. Now, it's not a theory. It's just saying, here's what we need to theorize about. The dynamics inside these boxes, I draw them out in a box. I could probably just do it verbally. So I believe much that sociology is like physics. It has a macro universe of stars and planets and a subatomic universe. We have something like the equivalent of that. We have macro structures, mesostructures, and then microstructures and processes. So the first thing, we have to have theory at 3 different levels. And then we also have to have theory that links them together. So there's the macro universe, and that consists of basically 4 different kinds of structures. Institutional systems, stratification systems, those are the pillars on which societal systems are built. Ultimately, a society is built on all of its institutional systems, of course, many of those, and the stratification system. Institutions are what create the stratification. And then the society is built from institutional stratification systems. The intersocietal systems are built from societies. Okay, that's the macro world. So I have to have I have to develop abstract theoretical principles that explain those institutional processes, but I don't want to break it down by kinship and religion and things like that. That's more empirically specific. So then then you say, okay, what is the stratification system built from? And what is any institution, what's it built from? And it's built from corporate units. All institutions are built from corporate units. There are just 3 basic types of corporate units: groups, organizations, and communities. That's it. These are units that have divisions of labor and they have goals that they have a division of labor within that to realize those goals. And then the micro level is interpersonal behavior. So that's why I've written 3 books, and I'm about to start the 4th book on what's going on at the interpersonal level again. Because I'm not done talking about that. I have things I want to say before I die. I'm not too far from death, but I'm hanging in there as long as I can. And so if you try to theorize about the economy and the polity and education, religion, you're going to have so many different theories, and it's useful to theorize about those things. I've done it, as you notice. I did it. I have an equation that says here's how economies work in terms of technology and physical capital and human capital, market dynamics, and other kinds of fundamental processes. But I divide that up in my more fully theorizing. I do it into production dynamics, and I include extraction dynamics, pulling resources, converting them to usable goods and commodities, and distributing them. But I divide that up into production and distribution, because I think distribution is a fundamental process, because ultimately that leads to markets and drive a lot of markets, which are a very important part of the economy. But so I break it apart so I can talk about them together again with theoretical principles and models. So when I do that, I look at the world. I've drawn a lot of diagrams of it, but
Okay.
I don't have to find one right now. But it's
not
pretty.
okay.
So that the macro level is driven by some forces. You extract those out of stratification forces, things, and institutional things. The meso level is driven by some forces. The micro level is driven by some forces. And the theory is not about the boxes. The theory is about the forces. If I know if I can create equations, essentially equations, and I use words, but I also can use equations for each of those forces. That is a general theory of human social organization, and that's what I've tried to do. At various times, I've vacillated between using equations. For example, in 1985, I wrote a book called Societal Stratification to Theoretical Analysis, and it's really a series of equations. It's quasi-equations. I don't want to write the real math ones up because they get too complicated, but they're equations. This thing I'm trying to explain is a function of these things. They have these relationships with each other. Think of this equation. On the left side is the thing I'm explaining, and the right side of the interaction effects along the forces that are driving the thing on the left side of the equation. So that's the only way you can actually have a general theory of society. If you try to say we're going to have an economy theory, a family theory, a religion theory, an education theory, you can have sort of empirical generalizations at that level. But I want to get more abstract than that. You have to go way abstract. And people say, why do you want to do that? That seems so far removed from the real world that I want to talk about. But what I'm trying to say is, someone like Einstein says E equals mc squared. That's pretty removed and abstract. But look what it can do. It can make a hydrogen bomb and do a nuclear reactor and a whole lot of other things. And so when I write an equation about production, here are the forces that increase or decrease production. And I write the equation. Production is a function of these things, and I bracket them and I weight them differently and have it out. That what I'm saying, at all times and places, wherever humans organize, and wherever they try to extract and convert resources as useful commodities for their survival, these are the forces. It's only about 5 or 6 things on this other side of the equation, but they have relationships. And there's a hunting and gathering economy or a post-industrial economy. That equation can explain them all. And so, in other words, the production of it, as it increases, it's increasing because there's changes in the values of the things on the right side of the equation. And so, when I go to distribution, I define distribution as the movement of information persons and commodities or resources around among a population. And so that means that distribution has two aspects. It has an infrastructural aspect. You've got to have infrastructural development to move things around, roads, ports, canals, airports, and so on. And in the end, it's not always there, but it is there among hunters and gatherers. You do have quasi-markets. There's this wonderful book I just read. It's called Silent Markets. It's about markets where no one talks to each other. This is how a lot of hunters gather. They put things out, retreat. The other ones come out, and if they accept what you're offering, then they put out what they're willing to offer for these things, and they retreat. And you come back, and then if you agree with that, you leave your stuff and take their stuff and walk away. That's apparently happened a lot among those gatherers who didn't trust each other. They didn't know it. They didn't have. They spoke different languages too. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of things that were traded like that: salt and access to certain kinds of things that some populations have. Anyway, anyway, it's going on. So the other one is so it's an exchange dynamics. So there's infrastructural dynamics, exchange dynamics. And then and those are the two big blocks of the equation. So there's a whole bunch of things that affect the ability to exchange and increase the capacity exchange, and a whole bunch of things that affect infrastructure. And then these two are connected to each other by usually it's a multiplicative effect by a sign of multiplication sign. You have this block and that block times that leads to increased debt distribution. Now you say that's so general, who cares? But it's the only way to get a handle on. Otherwise, you're just doing historical descriptions or commentary or just making up a story. What you want to do is explain why it is distribution goes up or it goes down. It has levels from very low levels of distribution to very high levels of distribution. That's all over the globe. There is an equation that can say this is what, if you change the values of these, you'll get high or low, and that's what social physics is all about. Now, it doesn't appeal to many people, I grant you, because it's not very sexy. It's actually hard, and you got to really think about things. And what the most important thing is, you have to know a lot of empirical stuff in history, because how do I load the values in that thing in the equation? Only by looking at historical cases and empirical cases. Yeah. I can't think that out of my head. I've got to say what kinds of societies have existed, and what does an economy look like? What do markets look like in, say, agrarian societies? You got simple to advanced. And so there's a huge range. And then what's it like? What is exchange like in horticultural societies? Well, they don't have money for the most part. They have some have money. Yeah. In hunting and gathering, actually some have hunting and gathering. For example, where I keep my boats in Santa Barbara, I'm an avid sailor, and I drive 3 hours to my boats because I like Santa Barbara. And the Aboriginals there, the Chumash tribe, who have now a big casino where they make a great deal of money, but there are only about 80 Chumash left. So they're very rich Chumash. And so, but the Chumash, before contact with the Europeans, had developed, they had created a monetary system. There's Santa Barbara Islands, there's islands off the coast of Santa Barbara, and then these relatively small canoes, they'd go across 24 miles of ocean to those islands. And there was a whole second group of them. There's one was the land group, which were sort of pretty much settled hunters and gatherers, and these were out there making the money. And it consisted of, and this is the first division of labor we know about in a hunting and gathering society, beyond this, the males hunt and the females gather. The divers brought up these shells. They're kind of like abalone shells, with a very unique color, shimmering color. And then they cut them into wafers like that. and then they drilled a hole. Someone had to drill a hole in them. And then they had to string them together with animal gut. So they'd hang together, and then they would string them together into batches of short or long, so different denominations. Now, this was not just, Chumash didn't just use these. These all were used all from Central California to the Mexican border to the Arizona border, over basically huge territory as the coin. They were accepted. And boy, does that change the dynamics of the world. Once you have a common denominator, once you have something that looks like money, these are hunter-gatherers. These are not horticulturalists even, and have something like money. You don't. If you have a cow and you want to change it for you have a chicken and you want to change it for a pelt, a fur or something. You got to have some. If you have a pelt of fur and you want a chicken, you got to find someone with a chicken. If you're a chicken who want a pelt of fur, you got to find someone with a pelt of fur. That's a lot of work, and then you got to negotiate. Well, how many pelts for how many chickens? Blah. But you have a value like that. I take my Chumash money and say how many of this for that, and you have a sale. So it was used by all the native tribes. It was, well, I live here in what's called the Mission, this Riverside, Marietta area, all the way down to San Diego, is a huge set of native populations. And in the case of the native populations here in this part of the world, this is where the casinos are. So you know where they are. There's the big casino here in Temecula, which is the sister city to Marietta. It's a huge casino. It's like as big as anything in Las Vegas. Going down towards San Diego, which is just 40 miles down the road, you've got 5 or 6 huge casinos down there. You go out toward the Riverside and San Bernardino and Palm Springs, which is east here, about 60 miles. You've got a whole bunch of casinos. Now you can identify all the Indians by casinos, but they once were separate populations of basically mostly hunter-gatherers, some are settled, some not, using this money for trade over a very long, geographical area, which would be. What country are you in now, right now? Where are you in? What?
Serbia. Serbia is ex-Yugoslavia.
So, well, you could probably get 5 or 6, 7 Serbias in. More of that. This is half of California, so it's a huge. And this hunter and gathering population was the banker for this whole all the trade of this area. So it can happen very early. So that's the point, is you have to have those historical cases because you're going to plug those into equations. So you would say production among these settled hunters and gatherers, normally there's kind of an upper limit to that. But with that kind of dynamic exchange, the production value is going to be higher because that exchange value down there in that equation is going to be higher. And now they don't have a lot of implements to actually produce and extract because they're hunters and gatherers. So that's never going to get to be huge, that production factor. But it's going to be very much based upon trade in a kind of a little mini world system. And so it's a fascinating deviant case. But so that you can write the equation, but you can't write the equation if you don't have some empirical sense for the world. That's why I've been writing about institutions, their evolution. So I'm always talking about simple, more complex, more complex, more complex. So I really get a sense of the history and the profiles of societies at different stages of development. So I have a good empirical sense about, but it's a limited empirical sense, and I'm always interested in how things change, and I'm not interested in the details of history. I'm interested in the sort of basic situation that England. What is England like as? I don't think of England as a country. It's sort of a place which was broken up in various ways. Probably still going to break up some more. But I look at it as a place where production and distribution was occurring, and where you could get another variable force and institution with all this power. So what creates power? So you have equation for economy and power, and those interact because there are going to be terms for power and terms for economy in each of the equations. And so when you get a series of equations like that, and it's really a limited number, that's my point. You're getting down to probably no more. Now, those books up there, I add a lot more propositions because I'm talking in words. But if I had to boil it down to equations, I could probably have about 12 equations that I would think maybe as many as 15 that would explain every level of the universe, social universe. Now, so in my mind, I said, I've explained it. Of course, I haven't because no one's listening. so no one's interested. People in the world, well, people outside of the United States are interested in this. People in the United States, sociologists are not so interested in this. They're interested in other issues. But
unfortunately,
well, that's sad. You know, it is sad. One time they were interested in these, but you know, the American sociology has become very activist, and it's kind of erratic. I'm actually one of the few people who was really an activist who actually risked his life and went to jail when I was a young man to
really
civil rights movement in the 60s. And here I am, I'm considered this old out of touch guy that's around running equations in his armchair. But that's also a true statement. It's something you don't risk your life when you're older. It's too precious when you get old, a few years. So, but other people around the world are interested. So that gives me some hope that sociology is not completely dead. I think in America it's going to be a big hard sell, and I really think it's going to have to be reinvented under another name. I think that there have to be two sociologies: scientific sociology and then sort of policy activist sociology.
Right.
They don't have to be mutually exclusive. But most of the people who talk about justice issues don't find my equations interesting, whereas I find them very interesting because I can.
I agree.
I think if you increase this, you get much more of that, or you get less of that. Because we're talking about inequality. I have a big firm of I, and that's a function of these things. And if you do this and this, that will go down. And if you do this and that, it'll go up. And that, to me, is the ultimate thing that we should be doing in social engineering. And I don't think that social engineering is necessarily a bad word. It's got some terrible connotations. People, when I say things like that, they say, "Oh, Auschwitz death camps, for Christ's sake." Holy smoke! I'm trying to keep us from doing stuff like that. But people think of these syndromes, and they can't intellectually escape. And that's my hope around the world. The emails that I get and the requests for information, articles, and I have most books, especially in societies where people don't have any money. I give them copies of them. I have all PDFs and I send them to them. I don't because they're not going to be sold anyhow there because they're too. These books are expensive. They're $150 each one of those. Most people in America wouldn't pay that.
Yeah.
So, but they're available if people want to have them. I can send them as PDF files.
That's very generous for me.
So the point is get the ideas out. The publishers are making the money by selling the chapters. That's how they can't sell the books. They sell chapter by chapter by chapter.
Really?
Yeah, I've actually sell quite a few chapters. I get a nice little royalty check each year, but the book. Well, it's just the economics of it. When your publisher commit to essentially a book, 3 books that are 1,200 pages all total, and you want to recoup your money, how are you going to do that? You're going to charge a lot for the volumes because the libraries will buy that. And then the rest you charge by chapter. It's not that cheap, but some people are just only buying a few chapters, things that they're particularly interested in. And so that's just the way. That is the unfortunate economics of publishing, and it's very difficult. It's much better to have the translations because what I can do is give away the translation rights, and then the book can be published in the economy where people can afford it. So I probably sell more books in China than I sell in the rest of the world. Maybe 40, 50,000 copies of my books a year. They're all translated, they've been translated for a long time and retranslated. And I don't get any royalties from them, but it's fine. I'm just interested in getting the ideas out. And they produced a little $10, which would be a very cheap book in America, a $10 book. I mean, something like this is the Human Nature book is quite reasonably priced. This one at like $40, but $40 is a lot of money to many people around the world. And this one you can get on sale for $35. Those are good deals by American standards. But in Bangladesh, no. Who's got $35? So I have to have a way to get that to them, because there's not enough market in Bangladesh. But there's a big enough market in India and China and occasionally in Europe. I mean, I have several books published in Serbian. Well, Europeans all read English. There's no reason to translate, really. Well, the French, they don't translate American books. Their books are translated for us.
Yeah.
There's some beauty about that.
Sorry. Then French people, I mean, they speak only French.
Yeah, well, I like to joke. I think I just gave a Zoom talk, and a guy from France wrote me. What about Foucault? And wouldn't he be interesting? He said, "Well, I think he's very interesting. I know he's not a sociologist. He's a historian and philosopher, thinker.
Okay.
He's the kind of guy you want to talk about over wine and coffee, and he says interesting things, but he's not explaining the world as it has to be explained, and he's not explaining the world in a way that's very useful. If you want to try to really re-engineer the world, you've got to understand the fundamental dynamics running that world, driving that world. Just like this is what any science does. I don't know why people think it's not possible in sociology. It is possible. You know, I've done it. Now, I may be wrong. The point is, if I'm wrong, do it better. But it's doable. It's not as if you can't do this. Maybe I did a lousy job, and I'm not smart enough to do the good job. But then, okay, take this sad song and make it better, and write it better. But don't say you can't do it. That's what I can't stand, because that means sociology will always be impotent. We'll never be able to use it for anything except what? Conversations among ourselves.
Right.
Part of having an intellectual discipline as a science is to create a science that can be used. And I mean, most of the problems in the world are not biological. Well, a lot of them are, or ecological. They are. But the underlying problem is the patterns of human social organization.
Right.
That's the problem.
That's also the thing.
We sit around and agonize over global warming, but we can't stop the juggernaut that we've unleashed because we don't understand the underlying principles by which they operate. Economists really don't have an idea. I'm going to tell you the truth. It seems kind of pathetic to me. They really don't know how economies work. They know how to describe economies in certain kinds of ways with certain really quite elegant mathematical equations. But those equations don't pertain to any real world that I know about. They're beautiful, but it's a field that's completely. There are more institutional economists in Europe, I know, who are more like sociologists would be, and I could talk to them. But I can't. So American economists don't even. I don't even bother talking to them. They just. So when I did a thing of the economy, they couldn't understand why I was doing that. What's power doing in there? You know, I have variables like values. I mean, what economists have done is take all the things that affect how economies really work, political systems, values, even markets to some degree. We don't want to talk about those. Those are too messy. So we're going to talk about the things that aren't so messy, and it can be put in a nice equation.
Yeah.
And I tell them, you could put these other things in the equations. They're not quite as elegant, but it can be done, and you'd be a lot better off. but that's a hard sell to an American economist. I think in Europe it's an easier sell, but not by much. I spent enough time in Europe and think tanks dealing with economists there. They're a little more open. Economists in America won't even talk to me unless they have to. They're stuck with me at a dinner table. They have no place to go. I'm there. So that's what I'm saying. The equation of the economy or production. The two equations you use for production for a distribution from the macrodynamics book or as a smaller book. Okay, it's still there somewhere. Those are the ones where I finally pulled it together. I wrote those between 2010 and 2013, and I haven't improved upon them very much. And then I have another book on stratification, the one I wrote in 1985, where I do the equations. And I've also written another book on stratification where I don't use equations, I use sort of words instead of the equations. And so I'm sort of revisiting a lot of those things as I get trying to do my last hurrah. So I've pretty much done institutions. The 4 books will be enough for that. And their evolution, and that's part of a more, as I've gotten into evolutionary processes, going to even studying things like human nature biologically and learning a lot about neurology, that's been pretty much done. There's not too much more to do that I could do with that. And then I want to write another book on stratification. One of the books I have, if I can live long enough, is a book entitled The Stratification of Human Emotions. I want to talk about emotions as one of the most positive emotions is one of the most valuable resources. Sociologists tend to think about power, prestige, and money as the only valued resources. There are lots of other valued resources out there that are distributed unequally. Stratification is much more robust than that. And positive emotions is one of them. And you can talk about that as a valued resource, just like money, because if you have positive emotion, you can do a lot of things. If you feel depressed and negative and angry, that really limits what you can do. But if you have positive emotions, that's just like having a lot of money in your pocket, because it gives you lots of energy to do things and achieve things. So these things I want to do, and it's all trying to develop very formal propositions. What are the things that increase or decrease positive emotions? I know what those are. I've written several books in that, 4 books in that, but I wrote one article on some preliminary principles of emotional stratification, but there's a whole book to be written on that. It's not a big book, it's a short one, but I want to talk about that because that's something that I think is important. It has a lot of policy implications. How do you get people happier? Well, here are the things that make them happy. You go back to the human nature stuff. What would make a grade 8 happy? What makes a grade 8 happy? And we already went over that, and that's there. And that means positive emotions. If people have positive emotions, they have energy. They'll do things. They'll do productive things, and things that they enjoy and experience. More positive emotions. And then I'm doing one more book on interaction. I think I'll live long enough to do that. And then who knows? I hope I live a long time. I have lots of other things I want to talk about, but it's very frustrating, and I can to sit around, and as I do in my armchair here, and I'm an armchair theorist. But that doesn't mean you haven't read anything. I mean, you can't think of theoretical principles can't be developed unless you have some sense for empirically what has occurred. And that's why it's very important to have an evolutionary orientation. You've got to see how things have gone from simple to more complex, and all the stages in between and what the dynamics were to figure out what the underlying, what's common to all those from simple to complex. What do they all have in common? And it's the same basic things. And some of them, they don't even have them, like power. it's very rare, recessive and nomadic hunters gatherers, and the hyphen agrarianism, you got tons of that being consolidated. And so once you know that how it's varied and what it's varied with, it's not magical. And so you're getting a huge set of data points. It's basically what evolutionary analysis does. Gives you a very large set of data points of very different kinds of social systems at very different stages of development, but they all engage in production, they all engage in distribution, they all engage in all these other things that are going to be in the equation. Equations are going to be about. And now I know what the values. So when I go to a hunting and gathering, I say, how much power is there? None. Very little. I said hunting together. Oh, they're getting a little power now. So I can see that's and then. That's the way you do it. And so you're taking the same generic forces and seeing what their values are given different stages of complexity and evolution, and size of population, and other things that are affecting that variations. And you can write the equations. They write themselves almost. If you're willing to think abstractly and pull back from all the data and think about what are the patterns of the data? What are they saying? And that's how you do theory, and it's incredibly exciting thing to do, because I really feel.
Yeah.
Some say I'm quite delusional, but that's okay. Maybe I am. I am unlocking the mysteries of the social universe, just like Copernicus or Einstein thinks they were doing, because and maybe someone along down the road will find these things. That's the good thing about the internet. It's all out there now.
Yes.
It's never going away. It's like they got big garbage dump in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's there and it's not going away fast. So I figure some enterprising student needing desperately a PhD topic will find my name and write a dissertation on me in the year 2240 or something.
Yeah, that's the great advantage.
I'll have a modest immortality. No one today in America is going to pay a lot of attention, that's for sure. It's not easy being a theorist in this world.
I believe. I mean, I imagine. When I think, I mean, what sociology could accomplish if all the sociologists were like you. I mean, if they were devoted to the positivistic doing of sociology. I mean, I think our science would be very, very respected among you.
I think it would be. I think I have most of my good friends are scientists, but they're not sociologists. I have several good sociology friends, of course, people like Randall Collins and whatnot are some of my best friends. I have a lot of friends who are scientists, and they still view me with because a suspect, but they do respect what I'm trying to do. Right. But they don't really count, because I've got to try somehow create a subdiscipline, and I think it has to break away from present day sociology. And I would like to go back to the original Comtean terms, call it the social physics. That's really what I'm doing, social physics. And I would like to see, if I were younger, in fact, if I were younger, I'd give the money for it. I have the money to give for it. I'd create a department of social physics at a university and endow it. And I could recruit a phenomenal faculty, because so many hard scientists who are sociologists in American sociology are so disillusioned. They write me all the time. And I really feel, I mean, for people my age, okay, we've had our time. It's not that critical. But the people who are really productive, feeling like they're not appreciated in their department because they're doing hard science, that's depressing. And they're 40 years old, and they still got maybe 30 more years of, at least 30 more years of work. And I could recruit a phenomenal faculty from all over the world who could have been focused on in different people want to do it different ways, but on the one fundamental underlying problem is what are the fundamental properties of the social universe and how do they operate? And how do we articulate how they operate? There's lots of different methods we can have. And that would be, you know, I don't think it'd take very many departments like that, because I can assemble, because people are desperate. They want out of their departments because they're just not appreciated. And that's a shame, because they're the most silent people in their departments. I'm far and away the most silent person in my department.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it's not that they, you know, by the normal criteria, they appreciate that, but they just don't believe in what I'm doing. That's all. So I want to be, I'm away from them. I've been retired for 5 years and I'm away from them. You know, these are people I actually like. You know, I personally like them. They just don't get it. And there's nothing you can do about that. They're just not interested in sociology doesn't interest them in that way.
Yeah.
And that's a shame. And so, but I have a feeling of the fact that you're giving this interview, and I get, I don't know how many emails a month, maybe 30 or 40,
Right.
people from just various parts of the world want to talk to me a little bit about hard science, and they're interested in something I've written, and I've now PDF'd almost all the major things I've written, so I can give it to them if they haven't, because they can't easily get access to a lot of things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I've got to get a web page and a lot of other stuff, but you know, I'm 78 years old. I'm not very computer literate. To me, this computer in front of me is a really cool typewriter.
But Stephen Sanderson.
I mean, the fact that I can sit here and talk to somebody on the screen is rather remarkable to me. That's magic.
Yeah, but Stephen Sanderson, he has his own web page. You know that Stephen Sanderson.
Yeah,
his own web page.
Yeah, he was in Riverside for a while.
Yeah.
You know. So, well, he's certainly he pays the price too. Like he's no, I mean, he and I have a pretty fundamental disagreement, because I don't buy into
I see that.
what he does. I mean, I think that the nature of selection and evolution of human populations is different than that in biology. Now, when you're talking about humans as organism, Darwinian selection is very appropriate. And that's so like the religion book, first half of the book is about the evolution of humans and their brains, and eventually would make them religious. The first half is all about that. It's all biology. And then the second half is all sociology and history. And but he still wants a kind of literal view of selection. Selection is on the individual, and it's the population is evolving. And I don't think that's really the case. Selection is first of all, the individual is sitting inside of a bunch of survivor machines, groups, organizations, communities, institutions, societies, and intersocietal systems. And these things, all those are evolving. All those are subject to selection. And when one changes, the others change. Maybe not dramatically, but they'll have some pressures on them. So if a group in an organization changes its structure and culture in ways, that may force other changes within the other groups of the organization. And if the organization change, it may first changes in other organizations that it's networked with, or within a broader institution it's in. So if an organization has some new way of doing something in the economy, it may change the whole economy.
Right.
Whoever built the first factory, it's suddenly, family farms and family factories are they're not efficient. They can't compete.
Right. For example, now societies are under selection pressures because of the COVID-19.
Oh yeah, I wrote a thing on it. In fact, I gave a talk on it. It's going to be on the internet. I was answering questions this morning from people who wrote emails.
Right.
Yesterday I was doing it. I just have proof at it today. But I have a nice diagram I use to talk about the levels of. So if you're down there at the genome and selection of the individual phenotype, that's appropriate to talk about Darwinian selection. as soon as you start talking about sociocultural phenotypes, and every group has a phenotype, sociocultural phenotypes, every organization, every community, every institutions, every society, intersocietal system.
Right, right.
And all those are all points of selection. And the selection is no longer blind. All those things have capacities for agency. And so they can see selection pressures, they can feel them, they can plan, and they can maybe they engage in reconstruction, so they can better adapt to the situations. And the pandemic in the United States is a very good example. This country is not prepared.
Right.
Well, we had a true fool for a president, a dangerous, mentally ill man. I can say a lot of other things, but and his whole family, a bunch of sociopaths. But anyway, that's
I agree.
thank God he's gone for a while at least. But anyway, but even then, if you can see that the current president is really doing what our president should have been doing,
Right.
But it's a system. Unlike a lot of other systems, it's a federalist system. It's got more centralized over the time, but you have 52 states with their governments. There's county governments with each of these states, city governments with each state. And then you have a medical system that is not wired as a national medical system. It's a series of clinics and offices and hospitals. They're all sort of profit-making operations. There's no networking really among them. Sometimes they share expensive equipment, and now suddenly you got to say you have to get to the third largest population in the world. You'd immediately get several 100 million doses of vaccine in their arm.
Right.
How fast could that happen? Especially given the historical animosities and exist among the states, and when you had a president polarizing everything, but he didn't do anything. He just didn't do anything. He did not get anything going. So that's when Biden got there, and he apparently decided that there was no plan in place. And so now they're having to create it rapidly, but they're way behind, and so it's a real problem. The most civilized countries have a national healthcare system, so right there they have some kind of centralized system for coordinating healthcare, if only for paying it. We don't, and then you don't have this weird mix of clinics and hospitals and individual doctors' offices or partnerships, all these different kinds of doctoring units. You have a few big plans like Kaiser Health.
Right.
But where I go to San Diego, because it's a 35-mile drive to my doctors, but I don't care. I go to the University of California at San Diego Medical Facility and the Scripps Medical Facility, two big medical facilities down there. And because they're big and they're coordinated, and everything's on a computer and it's really efficient, and but they are, they just got their drugs. It's been they had almost a year to prepare for this, and they just got their drugs. I got my first shot. And everyone in the county of Riverside, where I live, in the very western part of Riverside County, there's 3 million people in this county, and it's a very big county, and it's the 10th largest in the country. And they have, for example, they had a shipment of 10,000 units. And so now you take and everyone over 65 was eligible. And so there are probably about 80,000 people over 65, well, more than that probably. Anyway, they all are on the internet trying to get appointments to get that one of those $15,000 doses, about 10,000 doses. Chaos. If computers break down, and it's just every day, people just sit on the computer all day trying to find a moment when there's a little shipment and announce it, boom, you can go on the picture. It's insane.
Right.
They could have taken everyone's name, got their email, got their data, And that's what that's what's happening to, I see now in my big clinics down there, and they're well funded. They've got my name and they're writing me. We've now got appointments. Get on here and do it right now. And so that's why I was able to do it. And I've already got my second one, my second thing already scheduled. So, but most people don't have that. So it's chaos. It's hard to believe. This is the society that invented the computer. This is the society that invented the network. And we can't even do this well. That is pathetic. Every other society in the world is way ahead of us. It's just amazing. I just sit and wonder. They say sociologists. They think they don't need sociologists. You can see this disaster coming. Just make me the czar of this, and I can solve the problem. Sociologists solve problems like this.